Once you hear what happened inside these walls, you may never look at justice the same way again. San Quentin rises beside the cold waters of San Francisco Bay like a monument to punishment itself. At dawn, the prison looks almost peaceful from a distance. Fog drifts across the shoreline. Ferries move through the water. Cars glide across nearby highways. The outside world wakes up and keeps moving. But behind the gray concrete walls and rusted guard towers, time slows into something heavier, something harder to survive. The prison siren screamed at 5:13 a.m. Inside the East Block, hundreds of inmates froze instantly. Conversations stopped. Metal trays clattered onto concrete floors. Guards shouted orders down narrow walkways lined with steel bars. Then came the words every inmate feared. Lockdown. Full lockdown. Get down now. Men dropped to the floor. Some obeyed immediately. Others hesitated. That hesitation almost got them killed. Correctional officers stormed through the tier wearing tactical gear, rifles hanging from their chests. Boots thundered against metal stairs. Radios crackled nonstop, because somewhere inside San Quentin State Prison, an inmate had vanished. Not transferred, not released, vanished. And nobody understood how that was possible. Captain Elias Mercer stood inside the prison control room staring at dozens of surveillance monitors. 52 years old, former Marine, 26 years inside California corrections. He had seen riots, murders, stabbings, overdoses, gang wars, hostage situations. But this felt different. San Quentin was designed to control human beings down to the second. Every movement was tracked. Every cell counted multiple times a day. People did not simply disappear. Yet inmate Marcus Reed was gone. The problem wasn't just who Reed was. It was what he knew. Mercer rubbed his tired eyes, while officers searched every housing block in the prison. Reed had spent 19 years inside San Quentin for armed robbery connected to a double homicide in Oakland. During those 19 years, he became something dangerous. Not violent. Influential. He knew which guards smuggled contraband, which gangs controlled specific cell blocks, which inmates secretly worked as informants. More importantly, he had recently filed sealed legal documents connected to corruption allegations involving prison staff. 3 days earlier, Reed had told another inmate something disturbing during yard time. If I disappear, it wasn't an accident. At first, nobody took the comment seriously. In San Quentin, paranoia was survival. But now Reed's cell sat empty. His state-issued denim jacket remained folded on the bunk. His books were untouched. His prison ID card still rested beside the sink. Only Marcus Reed was missing. And that terrified everyone. Outside the prison walls, investigative journalist Claire Holloway parked near the waterfront and stared at San Quentin through her windshield. The prison fascinated her. Not because of its violence, because of its secrets. Claire had spent 5 years investigating deaths inside California prisons. Official reports rarely matched witness testimony. Inmates died during medical emergencies. Evidence disappeared. Surveillance cameras malfunctioned at convenient moments. San Quentin appeared constantly in her investigations. The prison was old. Too old. Built in 1852 during California's gold rush era, it had survived wars, riots, executions, scandals, and generations of political promises about reform. But underneath modernization efforts, the same darkness remained. Claire stepped out of her car as helicopters circled overhead. Something major had happened inside. She could feel it. At the prison entrance, reporters were already gathering behind barricades. Guards refused to answer questions. Then Claire noticed something strange. An ambulance leaving the facility under police escort. No sirens. No emergency lights. Just silence. Her instincts immediately sharpened. That meant either someone important was injured, or someone important was dead. Inside the prison, inmate Devin Hayes sat silently on the lower bunk of cell 4-213 listening to distant shouting echo through East Block. Hayes had survived San Quentin for 11 years by following one rule. Never notice too much. Inside prison, knowledge could kill faster than weapons. But yesterday, he noticed something. Around midnight, while most inmates slept, Hayes heard movement near the administrative corridor. He looked through the narrow slit between his bars and saw correctional officers escorting Marcus Reed down the tier. Reed's hands were cuffed, but that wasn't unusual. What frightened Hayes was Reed's face. He looked terrified. Not angry, not defiant, terrified. And walking beside Reed was Associate Warden Daniel Pike. Pike rarely entered inmate housing units personally. Men like him stayed behind office doors. But last night, Pike looked tense enough to explode. Hayes remembered hearing Reed say something quietly before disappearing around the corner. "You promised me protection." Then the corridor went silent. By morning, Reed was gone. Now Hayes sat frozen inside his cell, wondering whether speaking up would sign his own death warrant. Because everybody inside San Quentin understood one thing. People who threatened powerful systems rarely survived long. Captain Mercer walked through the prison hospital 2 hours later, while doctors argued behind closed curtains. The ambulance Claire saw earlier had carried correctional officer Luis Ortega, 34 years old, father of 2, found unconscious near an underground maintenance tunnel beneath the prison. Ortega's jaw was broken, his ribs fractured, and before losing consciousness, he whispered only 4 words. They buried him alive. Mercer stopped walking. The tunnel beneath San Quentin hadn't been used in decades. Originally constructed during prison expansion in the early 1900s, parts of the underground maintenance system had been sealed after flooding damaged the structure years earlier. Nobody was supposed to access those tunnels anymore. Nobody except maintenance supervisors or senior administrators. Mercer immediately ordered tactical teams underground. Officers armed with flashlights and rifles descended into the dark maintenance corridors beneath the prison. Water dripped from cracked ceilings, rust-coated old pipes. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Then one officer stopped suddenly. "Captain." Mercer stepped forward. At the end of the tunnel stood a newly welded steel door. Fresh weld marks, fresh scratches, fresh concrete dust. Someone had sealed something behind it recently. The tactical team cut through the metal while silence filled the tunnel. When the door finally opened, the smell hit first. Then the flashlight beams revealed a hidden room beneath San Quentin State Prison. Inside sat a chair bolted to the floor. Blood stained the concrete nearby. And chained to the wall was Marcus Reed's prison identification card. But Reed himself was nowhere to be found, until one officer looked upward and saw human fingerprints smeared across the ceiling vent from the inside, meaning Marcus Reed hadn't been trapped down there. He escaped, and somewhere beyond San Quentin's walls, a man carrying dangerous secrets was now free. Rain slammed against the streets of Marin County as police cruisers raced across the highway north of San Francisco Bay. Marcus Reed had been missing for 16 hours, and now California authorities had a nightmare on their hands. Because the man who escaped San Quentin wasn't running blindly. He was moving with purpose. At 2:14 a.m., a security camera captured Reed entering an abandoned marina warehouse less than 7 miles from the prison. The footage lasted only 11 seconds before the camera feed mysteriously cut out. But those 11 seconds changed everything. Reed wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a uniformed correctional officer. Captain Elias Mercer replayed the footage repeatedly inside the prison command center. Every officer in the room stared silently at the screen. The correctional officer wore a hooded rain jacket, but the body shape looked familiar. Too familiar. Mercer paused the video frame by frame until he noticed a tattoo partially visible near the wrist. A black serpent wrapped around a dagger. Mercer's stomach tightened instantly. Officer Luis Ortega. The same officer found unconscious near the underground tunnel, which meant Ortega had either helped Reed escape, or someone wanted it to look that way. Associate Warden Daniel Pike entered the command center carrying a folder thick with sealed documents. His usually calm face looked pale under the fluorescent lights. "State investigators are coming," Pike said quietly. "Media's already tearing this place apart." Mercer barely looked at him. "Why was Reed moved last night?" Pike hesitated. Administrative reasons. That's not an answer. Pike lowered his voice further. Reed claimed he had evidence against staff members. Smuggling, assaults, illegal lockdowns. He wanted immunity in exchange for names. Mercer stared at him, and he threatened to release everything publicly. The room went silent, because inside prisons like San Quentin, corruption allegations weren't just scandals. They were explosives, especially when gangs, officers, and administrators became connected. Mercer stepped closer. So you pulled him from East Block in the middle of the night? Pike's jaw tightened. I was trying to protect him. Mercer looked back at the frozen video image of Marcus Reed disappearing into the rain beside Officer Ortega. Looks like someone got to him first. Across the bay, Claire Holloway sat inside her apartment, surrounded by case files, prison reports, and handwritten notes taped across her walls. She hadn't slept in almost 20 hours. Every instinct told her Marcus Reed's disappearance was bigger than a prison escape. Much bigger. Her laptop screen displayed archived complaints filed by San Quentin inmates over the past decade. Missing evidence. Suspicious inmate deaths. Assault accusations quietly buried. And one name appeared repeatedly across multiple reports. Associate Warden Daniel Pike. Claire leaned closer. Years earlier, Pike supervised internal investigations involving contraband trafficking inside the prison. Every case mysteriously collapsed due to insufficient evidence. Witnesses recanted. Records vanished. Informants disappeared into segregation units. One inmate who agreed to testify against corrupt officers was later found dead in his cell. Official cause of death: suicide. But the autopsy photographs told another story. Claire's phone suddenly vibrated. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. A weak male voice whispered through static. You're looking in the wrong place. Claire froze. Who is this? You want the truth about San Quentin? Stop looking at the prison. The caller coughed violently. Then came the sentence that made Claire's blood run cold. Look at the men getting rich from it. The line disconnected instantly. Claire stared at her phone in silence. Then her email notification appeared seconds later. One attachment. No message. She opened it carefully. The file contained financial records linking multiple correctional staff members to offshore accounts, receiving unexplained deposits over several years. One name stood above all others: Daniel Pike. Inside an abandoned warehouse near the marina, Marcus Reed pressed a blood-soaked towel against Officer Ortega's shoulder wound. The officer groaned painfully. You should have left me back there, Ortega muttered. Reed shook his head. No, innocent people die for this. Ortega laughed bitterly. Innocent? You still think anybody around this prison is innocent? The warehouse smelled like seawater and rusted metal. Rain leaked through holes in the roof, while distant police sirens echoed across the shoreline. Reed looked exhausted. 19 years inside prison had aged him beyond recognition. Gray spread through his beard. Deep scars crossed his knuckles. His eyes carried permanent caution. But beneath the exhaustion lived something stronger. Fear. Not fear of prison. Fear of what powerful people would do to protect themselves. Ortega winced painfully while adjusting his bandage. You should have taken a deal. Reed stared at him sharply. The deal gets me buried in that tunnel. You don't understand how high this goes. Reed's voice hardened instantly. I understand perfectly. 3 months earlier, Reed accidentally overheard officers discussing missing prison funds connected to inmate labor contracts. Money generated through prison manufacturing programs was disappearing into shell companies. Millions of dollars. When Reed started quietly asking questions, people noticed. Soon afterward, inmates connected to the scheme began turning up injured. One disappeared entirely. Then Reed discovered something worse. The corruption wasn't limited to San Quentin. It stretched into private contractors, state officials, and organized criminal networks, using prison systems to move money unnoticed. Reed became dangerous simply by surviving long enough to learn too much. Now people wanted him erased permanently. Suddenly, headlights swept across the warehouse windows. Both men froze instantly. Vehicles approaching. Multiple. Ortega reached weakly for his handgun. Reed moved toward the shadows. Outside, car doors slammed shut. Then silence. A voice echoed through the darkness. Marcus. Reed recognized it immediately. Captain Mercer. You're surrounded, Mercer shouted. This ends tonight. Ortega whispered urgently. Don't trust him. Reed stayed silent. Mercer stepped cautiously into the warehouse, holding only a flashlight. No rifle. No tactical team visible behind him. Reed, Mercer called again. I came alone. That's a lie, Reed answered from the shadows. Mercer stopped walking. You think I don't know what this prison really is? Rain hammered the roof overhead. Mercer's expression darkened. Then help me expose it. Reed finally stepped partially into view. You're too late for that. Mercer noticed blood on Reed's clothes immediately. Where's Ortega hurt? Still alive, Reed answered. For now. Mercer exhaled slowly. Listen carefully. Pike's trying to pin everything on Ortega. Internal Affairs already sealed records connected to your case. Because Pike built the system. I know. That answer stunned Reed. Mercer stepped closer carefully. For years, I thought corruption here was isolated. A few bad officers. Smuggling. Violence. I ignored the signs because prisons survive on control. But this, he looked around the warehouse grimly. This is something else. Reed's eyes narrowed. Then why are you really here? Mercer reached slowly into his coat pocket. Reed immediately aimed Ortega's handgun toward him. Mercer stopped, then carefully removed a small flash drive. I found this hidden in your old cell. Reed's face changed instantly. The flash drive contained evidence. Names, transactions, recordings. Enough to destroy careers and send powerful men to prison. Mercer placed it slowly onto the floor between them. You were right, Mercer said quietly. Someone inside San Quentin buried people to protect this. Reed never lowered the weapon. Why help me now? Mercer looked directly into his eyes. Because 6 years ago, my son died from an overdose connected to a gang operating inside this prison. Silence filled the warehouse. Mercer's voice nearly broke. And every time I got close to the suppliers, investigations disappeared. Reed finally understood. Mercer wasn't protecting San Quentin anymore. He was hunting the men, controlling it. Suddenly, tires screeched outside. More vehicles. This time armed tactical teams flooded the marina entrance. Laser sights cut through the darkness. Mercer spun around in shock. I didn't call them. Then Associate Warden Daniel Pike stepped into the warehouse doorway, surrounded by heavily armed officers. Rain poured behind him like a curtain of black water. Pike's face looked calm again. Controlled. Dangerously calm. He slowly removed black leather gloves while staring directly at Reed. You should have stayed underground, Pike said coldly. Then Pike looked at Mercer. And you should have remembered who signs your pension checks. Dozens of rifles aimed at Reed instantly. But nobody noticed Officer Ortega quietly reaching for the detonator hidden beside his wounded leg. And when Claire Holloway's car suddenly crashed through the warehouse doors with cameras recording live online, everything spiraled into chaos. Metal screamed against concrete as Claire Holloway's car smashed through the warehouse entrance. Headlights exploded across the room. Armed officers turned instantly, blinded by the sudden impact. And for one chaotic second, nobody controlled the situation anymore. Claire shoved open the driver's door, holding her phone high above her head. "You're Liv," she shouted. Her live stream had already reached thousands of viewers. The comments flooded faster than she could read. Police corruption? Prison cover-up? What is happening? Associate Warden Daniel Pike's expression changed for the first time that night. Fear. Real fear. Because secrets hidden inside San Quentin were never meant to leave prison walls. But now cameras captured everything live across the internet. Pike immediately pointed toward Claire. "Take her phone." Officers surged forward, but Captain Mercer stepped between them. "No one touches her." The tactical team hesitated. Mercer outranked most of them. For years, he had been respected inside San Quentin as a man loyal to the institution above everything else. Seeing him stand against prison leadership stunned everyone. Pike's calm mask disappeared completely. "You have any idea what you're doing?" Pike snapped. Mercer's voice remained steady. "Ending this." Rain pounded the warehouse roof while Marcus Reed slowly backed toward Ortega. The wounded officer's hand still rested near the hidden detonator beneath a stack of rusted tools. Claire kept filming everything. "Daniel Pike," she said loudly into the live stream, associate warden of San Quentin State Prison, caught at an illegal off-site operation connected to a missing inmate investigation. Pike stared at her with open hatred. "You think the public cares?" he said coldly. "Tomorrow this becomes another conspiracy story people forget by lunch." Then he looked directly at Reed. "But you?" His voice lowered dangerously. "You were supposed to disappear quietly." Reed finally stepped fully into the light. For 19 years, San Quentin had stripped pieces of him away. Hope, family, time, identity. But at that moment, he looked stronger than anyone inside the warehouse. Because he had survived long enough to expose the truth. "You buried inmates under that prison," Reed said. Silence. Nobody moved. Claire's livestream comments exploded instantly. "What? Buried inmates? Is this real?" Pike slowly smiled. "You know what prison teaches better than anything else, Marcus?" he asked softly. "People only believe what they're comfortable believing." Mercer's jaw tightened. "How many?" Pike looked at him casually. "Enough." The answer chilled the entire room. Years earlier, during prison expansion and underground renovations, certain inmates had vanished during lockdown periods. Officially, they were transferred, released, moved into federal custody. In reality, some never left San Quentin alive. Most had one thing in common. They threatened profitable operations tied to prison corruption, drug trafficking, illegal contracts, money laundering through inmate labor programs. The prison wasn't just a prison anymore. It was a business protected by silence. And Pike had spent years making sure nobody spoke loudly enough to threaten it. Ortega suddenly coughed violently from the floor. Blood stained his sleeve darker. Pike glanced down at him with disappointment. "You were useful once." Ortega laughed painfully. "I watched you order hits on inmates." The tactical officers shifted uneasily. Several exchanged nervous looks. Because now the story was becoming impossible to contain. Claire moved closer carefully while filming. "Is that true?" she demanded. Pike ignored her. Instead, he looked directly at the officers surrounding him. "You all know how this works," he said calmly. "We clean this up tonight, and life continues normally tomorrow." Nobody answered. Mercer slowly removed his badge. The tiny metal emblem had defined his entire adult life. Now he dropped it onto the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the warehouse. "No," Mercer said quietly. "Not this time." Pike's face darkened instantly. Then everything erupted at once. Ortega slammed his hand onto the detonator. A deafening explosion ripped through the warehouse floor behind Pike. Concrete shattered violently. Officers fell backward. Lights exploded overhead. Smoke consumed the room instantly. People screamed. Gunfire erupted blindly through the darkness. Claire dropped behind her overturned car while still clutching her phone. The live stream shook wildly as viewers watched chaos unfold live across America. Mercer tackled Reed behind steel crates just before bullets tore through the air above them. "Move," Mercer shouted. More explosions thundered beneath the warehouse. Not bombs. Gas lines. The entire marina structure groaned dangerously. Pike disappeared into the smoke. Outside, sirens screamed from every direction as local police, state investigators, and federal agents flooded the shoreline after seeing Claire's live stream explode online. Millions were now watching. Inside the collapsing warehouse, Reed staggered through smoke, searching desperately for Ortega. He found the wounded officer trapped beneath fallen debris. "You need to leave," Ortega gasped. Reed grabbed the concrete slab, crushing Ortega's leg. "We both leave." Ortega weakly shook his head. "No time." Flames crawled rapidly across broken fuel lines nearby. The entire building was seconds from becoming an inferno. Ortega forced something into Reed's hand. A small key. Storage locker. Ortega whispered painfully. Oakland Station. Everything's there. Financial records. Names. Videos. Reed stared at him silently. Ortega's eyes filled with regret. I helped them at first, he admitted. Thought it was survival. Inside prison, survival makes monsters out of people. The flames spread closer. Then Ortega looked toward Mercer. Get him out. Mercer nodded once. A moment later, the warehouse ceiling partially collapsed. Reed barely escaped with Mercer and Claire before the structure erupted behind them in flames. Fire consumed the marina while emergency crews flooded the area. And somewhere inside the collapsing inferno, Daniel Pike vanished. His body was never officially recovered. 3 weeks later, San Quentin sat under massive federal investigation. News helicopters hovered daily above the prison. Multiple correctional officers were arrested. Hidden financial networks connected to prison labor programs became national headlines. Secret recordings exposed years of abuse, intimidation, and inmate disappearances. Public outrage exploded. Families demanded answers about missing prisoners dating back decades. Mass graves beneath old maintenance tunnels were eventually discovered during excavation beneath part of the prison. America watched in horror. Captain Elias Mercer testified publicly against former prison administrators before quietly resigning from corrections forever. Claire Holloway's reporting won national awards. But the story haunted her. Because even after everything exposed publicly, one question remained unanswered. Where was Daniel Pike? Authorities believed he died in the fire. Claire never believed it. Neither did Marcus Reed. 6 months later, Reed stood near the San Francisco waterfront staring across the bay toward San Quentin. For the first time in 19 years, he stood outside prison walls as a free man. The old prison still looked the same from a distance. Cold, massive, watching. But now America finally saw what lived inside those walls. Not just violence, not just punishment, but a system capable of burying human beings beneath secrecy and calling it order. Claire approached quietly beside him. You ever think about going back? She asked. Reed looked toward the prison one last time. Every day, he admitted. That place teaches you freedom isn't normal. Then his phone vibrated unexpectedly. Unknown number. Reed answered cautiously. For several seconds, only static filled the line. Then a calm voice whispered, You should have stayed silent. The call disconnected instantly. Reed slowly lowered the phone. Claire saw his expression change immediately. What is it? Across the bay, sunlight reflected off San Quentin's guard tower windows. And somewhere deep inside the prison system, someone was still watching. Because prisons like San Quentin never keep just one secret. And some men never stop protecting them. If you thought San Quentin was dark, wait until you hear what happened inside the next prison.